We are going to begin with a brief 20-minute video that we have for you on the process of application process of this next cohort of Digitizing Hidden Collections. And then after that, we'll be followed live with some question and answers. So here we go.
Hello, and welcome to the first applicant webinar for the third cycle of CLIR's Digitizing Hidden Special Collections and Archives, Amplifying Unheard Voices program. I'm Louisa Kwasigroch, Managing Director and Manager of the CLIR Grants team, and we are so glad to be here to share some information about the call for applications. We will start by making some introductions, first to this platform and then to our team. To start, we want to share some notes about how you can use Zoom during this session. A live transcript is being generated if you'd like to utilize it. To turn on this feature, click the CC Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you're welcome to use chat for general introductions and conversation. If a chat box isn't already displaying on your screen, you can hover your mouse toward the bottom of the Zoom window and open it manually. To send a message to everyone, remember to change the default from hosts and panelists to everyone. Because chat can get busy, we ask that you use the separate Q&A box to ask questions today. This box can be opened the same way as the chat box. You can submit questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. If you're following along with those questions as they come in, you can upvote them if they're similar to your own to let us know that it would be helpful to you to have them answered live. If we don't have time to get to all the questions, we'll compose responses to the remaining ones and post all the answers along with the session transcript. The Q&A session recording and transcript will be available on our website's Apply for an Award page by the end of next week. The Council on Library and Information Resources, or CLIR, is an independent nonprofit organization with a mission to forge strategies to enhance research, teaching, and learning environments in collaboration with libraries, cultural institutions, and communities of higher learning. Although we're talking about a funding opportunity today, it's essential to understand that CLIR is not a funding agency. Instead, our programs are supported through sponsorships and external funding. For the Digitizing Hidden Collections, Amplifying Unheard Voices program, we receive funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and CLIR acts as the re-granting agency. Just as we receive proposals and reports from grant recipients, we also send proposals and reports to Mellon and other funding organizations. CLIR's work is accomplished by a relatively small staff of about 20 geographically distributed individuals. Today's webinar is hosted by the CLIR Grants team, which administers CLIR's active re-granting programs, offering support for the entire grant cycle from application to final report. Our team consists of Sharon Burney, a program officer in Gainesville, Florida, Alyson Pope, a program officer in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Jane Larson, a program associate in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Lizzie Albert, Deputy Operations Officer in Washington, D.C. And I'm based near Chicago, Illinois. If you have technical difficulties during the session, send me a message in Zoom.
Our team would like to center today's conversation by acknowledging that as residents of the United States, we are speaking to you from the unceded land of many indigenous peoples. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air where I live, the Tamiqua and Seminole peoples, and their ancestors and descendants. I am grateful to have the opportunity to live and work in their homelands. I ask you to join me in acknowledging all Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, and future generations. May this acknowledgement and the program we're speaking about today demonstrate CLIR's commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Now that we've introduced ourselves, we'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to share your name, organizational affiliation, where you live, and any land acknowledgements in the chat. During the rest of our time together, we'll offer a program overview, including some history of digitizing hidden collections, what Amplifying Unheard Voices adds, and definitions of core components of this program. Some detailed instructions and tips for applying to the program, including what to expect in the two parts of this program's application process, and time to answer your questions. Now, let's move into an overview of the Digitizing Hidden Special Collections and Archives program. The 2021 call for proposals launched the third iteration of a CLIR program whose roots date back to 2008. What started as a funding opportunity for nonprofit organizations to catalog hidden collections has transformed to continue the work of the digitization program with a thematic focus. The Cataloging Hidden Collections program supported more than 170 organizations, with 128 projects documenting over 6 million items. The work of the first iteration of Digitizing Hidden Collections is coming to a close, but still underway, with more than 194 organizations participating in 101 funded projects that have already created more than 9 million master digital files. Amplifying Unheard Voices awarded funding to 16 projects at 49 organizations in its first cohort. The second cohort's funded projects will be announced in the fall. Amplifying Unheard Voices aims to fund projects that propose to digitize materials that deepen public understanding of the histories of people of color and other communities and populations whose work, experiences, and perspectives have yet to be sufficiently recognized in digital collections. This often hidden histories include, but are not necessarily limited to, those of Black, Indigenous, Latina, and other people of color, women, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, and other genderqueer people and communities, immigrants, displaced populations, blind, deaf, and disabled people and communities, and colonized, disenfranchised, enslaved, and incarcerated people. The program's core values reflect its broad objectives and thematic focus. You can use these core values as you develop projects, ensuring reviewers can see these elements woven throughout your application. Our reviewers will also focus their evaluations of applications on these same values. In the past, the program's values motivated the development of collections-focused projects. Still, we hope the new core values will encourage and challenge organizations to see how their digitization work can be people-focused too. More information on the core values is on the home page of the program and the frequently asked questions.
So what do we mean by digitization? All projects submitted for consideration must have digitization as the primary activity, which means the creation of digital representations of unique physical artifacts or objects. While description, such as cataloging or metadata creation, and other work to enhance access, such as transcription or translation, may be included in projects, that work must be supplemental to the digitization work. This program does not support further description, manipulation, or migration to alternative digital formats for content that was born digital or has been previously digitized. The original objects nominated for digitization may be in any format, and projects may combine digitization of materials from a variety of formats, such as books, manuscripts, maps, 3D objects, textiles, various audio/audiovisual formats, and more. If you have questions about what qualifies as a digitization project, contact the CLIR Grants team. Next, what do we mean by hidden? For this program, applicants are asked to convincingly demonstrate that the materials nominated for digitization cannot meaningfully impact public understanding of people, communities, and populations whose work, experiences, and perspectives have been insufficiently recognized or attended in the past until those materials are digitized, discoverable, and accessible in ethical, respectful, and legal ways. Explaining how digitization is critical to opening access to the materials is essential. We expect collections nominated for digitization to be in various stages of description, ranging from fully processed or accessioned to minimal or no descriptive records available. Applicants are encouraged to design projects that fill description gaps in projects using digitization workflows to think about how item or collection descriptions can be enhanced, corrected, and created. And finally, what do we mean by collections? You'll note that the title of this program more specifically mentions special collections and archives. For this program, special collections are rare or unique materials housed in secure, monitored environments and made available to the general public. Archives are unique, often unpublished materials associated with a specific individual, topic, location, or organization of historical and/or cultural interest. While the materials nominated for digitization may be in any physical format, they must be owned and held by an eligible organization. Because of the thematic focus, the materials must also have been created by or describe people of color or other communities and populations whose work, experiences, and perspectives fit the program's scope. Visit the funded projects page for an idea of the scope and scale of work funded through this program. We are also working to update the Apply for an Award page with some application examples from Cohort 1 awardees. You can see a sampling of their representative images here.
Now we'll work through how to apply. We have provided all the information you should need on our Digitizing Hidden Collections program pages. We'll share the links throughout the presentation and point to specific resources. The recording of this webinar, the slides, and a transcript of questions and answers will also be posted on the Apply for an Award page by August 29th for your later reference. As you consider applying to our program, the most essential resource for you is the application guidelines. Combining instructions and insights into the program and its application process, the guidelines also allow you to draft responses to questions before adding them to our online grant application platform. A view-only Google Doc is linked to the Apply for an Award program page. Users without a Google account can access this version and download the document in whatever file format they wish using the File menu. For those with a Google account, we've also included a link to create an editable copy of the document automatically. An updated version of the guidelines will be shared with those invited to submit a final application to the program. The initial application comprises 9 discrete tasks in 4 forms to collect information about your organization and project. The application guidelines address each task in much greater detail, but we'll cover a few important points today. The first task asks you to confirm your organization's eligibility, any collaborating organizations, and your project. We also include all eligibility details on our website and in the guidelines. In the initial application, we do not request any documentation confirming the eligibility of organizations according to our program's instructions. Documentation will be required if your proposal is invited to submit a final application. Of particular note, this program requires that materials nominated for digitization be owned and held by eligible organizations. If you're proposing a project that includes the digitization of materials from multiple eligible organizations, we strongly recommend that you design a collaborative project. In the applicant information task, you'll be asked to provide information on the organizations involved in the project. If this initial application round We're most interested in collecting information on the potential collaborating organizations, if applicable. While collaboration is not a requirement of this program, our core values support authentic partnerships, which can take many forms. For this program, remember that organizations named collaborators typically contribute materials for digitization and/or provide critical support for creating and maintaining access to digitized items over time. The final application will ask more descriptive information on the nature of any collaborations. Please explore the application guidelines in our online FAQ for more information on collaboration. All projects must assign at least one and no more than 3 principal investigators or PIs to the project. PIs are CLIR's primary contacts throughout the application and funding process. Applicants do have the option of listing an additional contact during the application phase.
The next task asks applicants to supply basic project information. As part of this section, we ask applicants to assign up to 6 keywords or phrases that best describe the fields of study connected to your project. Rather than using general terms like digitization, which we assume will apply to all the projects submitted to the program, think of words or phrases that would help others quickly understand the content of the materials nominated for digitization. CLIR staff will likely use this information to help us as we assign applications to reviewers for evaluation. For those familiar with our program, we've always asked whether or not a proposal is a resubmission to the program, followed by a space that allows applicants to address previous comments from reviewers. We will still ask applicants whether or not they are resubmitting to the program, but there is no space here to address any changes as the program has changed over the years. As you enter the information on the size of your request and the project timeline, abide by the program's restrictions. All projects should request a minimum of 50,000 and a maximum of 300,000. 300,000. Funding amounts will be awarded in US dollars, with actual funds distributed according to the location of the lead applicant organizations based on current exchange rates as necessary. All projects must be 12, 24, or 36 months and begin on January 1, 2026. The initial project details tasks contain the primary content of the initial application. This is where we ask applicants to tell the story of their materials and their organization and explain the need for funding from this program. Each of the 6 prompts allows up to 500 words to engage the reviewers in your story. The responses to each of these prompts connect to the core values of this program, and for those invited, will be used to start building final application submissions. Reviewers will be using a rubric for the assessment of initial applications, and these prompts will provide the heart of your proposal in their assessment. The application guidelines offers instructions and deeper insights into these prompts to help guide your application writing. They also contain the rubric that reviewers will use as an appendix. Two upload sections have been added to the initial application this cycle. The first is an estimated budget narrative for the project costs broken down by the program's allowable cost categories. The application guidelines provide full details on allowable costs and budget limits. This is meant to serve as a ballpark estimate with the understanding that it may be adjusted if invited to the final application round. There are no service provider quotes required in the initial application. The second is an optional space for additional uploads. Applicants can include appendices with this application, provided their relevance to the project is clear and their length is reasonable given anticipated heavy demands on review panelists' time. Some examples of relevant additional document uploads could be a collection assessment document or donor agreements related to the materials being proposed for digitization. Once you've completed all of the required tasks in the online system, you'll have the option to review and submit your proposal. This gives you one last chance to review everything you've written and upload it and go back to make edits. Once you are confident your application is complete, click the Submit Your Application button and click Submit again if prompted. Once submitted, you'll see your application in the My Applications space and be able to download a copy for your records. A confirmation email will be sent from the SM Apply system. Check your spam folders if you do not see that within 24 hours. The grants team is always happy to answer any questions about the application submission process. An independent review panel reviews applications for the Digitizing Hidden Collections program. CLIR maintains a largely standing panel of reviewers with expertise in digitization, digital collections, rights, ethics, and reuse in various academic subjects. Their names and affiliations will be posted on our website by the end of the initial application period. During the initial review process, at least 2 reviewers read each application, and a portion of applications will be invited to prepare an application for the final stage.
Initial applications must be submitted online by October the 30th, 2024. We anticipate that all organizations that submit an initial application will be notified if they are invited to submit a final application in mid-February 2025. We anticipate providing additional support to those organizations invited to the final round to help develop initial applications into competitive final applications. This will involve a number of individuals from CLIR's community, including review panel members. We anticipate making the public announcement of funded projects in November of 2025. Details of the final application are still in progress. However, we anticipate that the size and scope of the application will be similar to the previous Digitizing Hidden Collections cycles. We aim for you to use the groundwork of your initial application to build the complete final application. It may be productive in this stage to think about how you'll expand your responses in the final round, providing more complete descriptions of the collections, their significance and potential impact, and the project design and long-term sustainability of the digital deliverables. We're anticipating an application that includes 10 general sections. We expect the applicant information and project summary to remain the same as during the initial round. Most of the final application will expand upon your initial application, including description and content, rights, ethics, and reuse, significance and context of the materials, the potential impact of the project, the institutional capacity, and budget and funding documents. The section that will require the most development will be the project work plan. The final application will also require uploads, including letters of support from your organization, the communities represented in the materials, and scholars. The application guidelines for the initial application include the outline of the final application sections shown here to encourage forethought for expanding on initial application if invited.
Sharon, I believe you're muted.
Thank you, Lizzie. Before we move into our question and answer time, we want to note a super short survey about the webinar. This is part of our program assessment, so your honest feedback on the webinar will help us in our future support efforts. We'll share the link in the chat and include it in an automated message after the event. So now it's time to turn to your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And any unanswered questions will be answered in our transcript, which will be shared on our website along with the webinar recording. And we hope to stop at 2 o'clock, so we'll try to answer as many as we can.
Sharon, you want me to take a first one?
Yes, please.
So we'll start from the top. The question is, how many have shown up today and how many grants do you give versus rejections? There are over 100 attendees in this current webinar. The number of grants we give versus rejections varies because our award size is so variable from $50,000 to $300,000. So it can depend on the pool. Last year, we were able to invite approximately 50 forward to the final application stage from an initial application round of roughly 130, but these numbers change every year.
Thank you. What are the most important eligibility criteria for large-scale applications? Those that are $300,000. For example, is weight given to additional donors, proof of team expertise, scope of accompanying outreach activities, etc. So we use an independent review panelist made up of experts in the field. And each individual project is so different, it's hard to state that. As far as the money is concerned, so when you come up with your budget template or narrative, they want to know that the budget makes sense. The primary focus of the project is digitization. However, so is outreach, authentic partnerships, and the rest of our core values. So do you tell a compelling story in your narrative about it? Does the subject matter of the collection have broad, not just local, but broad and possibly transnational appeal? Are the digitization, the amount of if your materials that are nominated in your work plan is equal. So, you don't want to have a collection that's large that you can't complete in the 1 to 3 years that's required in the program. We just want the reviewers just want to know that you're telling a great story about this collection and why it's necessary for possible researchers and others in the field to see this available online. And does your work plan and your project make sense fiscally? Hope that answers the question generally.
What about independent scholars and private archives? The program's eligibility is currently limited to nonprofit, educational, and cultural heritage institutions in the United States and Canada. It's not currently modeled to be open to individuals on a private basis.
Will we be eligible if we have previously received an award from this program for a different project or collection set? So the dates for this award, the projects are to start January 2026 and end no later than December 3rd, 2028. So if you already have a project and it's completed before the start date of January 2026, you will be eligible.
Is it acceptable to propose a project where some items may be made publicly accessible on the internet, but potentially a large number of items would be made available to the communities represented and or researched by request, e.g. field notes, letters, and items where copyright cannot be determined? As Sharon stated earlier, we do use an independent review panel. They're a standing panel that has a lot of experience evaluating these proposals. There are definitely proposals where we have had larger numbers of restricted access items due to the nature of the materials, whether there be cultural sensitivity or private information in them that requires them to be restricted. So the panel understands that there can be a need for that, and it just needs to be clearly explained in the application, approximately what percentage of the materials you think would be restricted access and why.
Why is the start date so far out? Well, this is a two-step application process. So we have an initial review application, and then after the initial review application, your application will undergo a tech review from the staff. Then after that, we will prepare for the initial panel review. After the initial panel review, we then give everybody feedback. We have to get the comments together. And then those who are invited to a final application, we start that whole process over again. After the final application review panel, which has to meet, we have to get the comments back. We then have to sign grant agreements with each individual organization and make sure that those get back in time for signatures from all the appropriate people necessary. So it is a long process, but this is why it is out, to make sure that we're thorough and that we're providing people equitable abilities to write a competitive application. We have an applicant support webinar series for those invited back to the final round, which brings in experts from different from fields to help you with some of the more laborious parts of your final application.
If a third-party scholar is working on the project, can they receive a payment? If so, would that be a stipend or consulting fee? Can they be designated as a PI? The answer to basically all of those questions are yes. Whether it's designated as a stipend or consulting fee, or whether you denote them as a form of subcontractor, depends on the structure of your proposal and the type of work that they are doing. Like, are they acting as a consultant to you, or are they acting as more of a digitization vendor contractor, for instance? And it is possible that you can designate them as a PI, although we prefer that the primary PI be from the lead applicant institution.
Can a scholar connected to the community receive travel funds to provide outreach with the community? Can the grant include funds for a community outreach event, e.g. a showing and overview of the digitized materials? Yes. So part of the authentic partnerships does allow for money in the core values, allows for money for these type of things. We do want to look at what your outreach is going to look like. In some of these, a showing, sometimes people do small symposiums. You can include that in your budget. Providing honorariums to community partners, elders and scholars connected to the collections, those type of items are allowable in your budget. If you want to include travel to participate at a conference to present your project to a conference, that is limited to $7,500 of your
Does the lead applicant institution need to be the actual owner of the archival materials to be digitized, or can it be an institution that leads and implements digitization of other entities' archival collections? May a project include digitization of important material held and owned by small local museums and community groups that have nonprofit status, but may not archive the materials in conformity with professional standards? Yes. These projects, this program is designed to hold space for collaborative projects. I think an example I can give from the first cohort of AUV1, the lead organization is Washington State, but I believe they have 16 collaborators on that grant. There are non-tribal organizations and several other universities. They're kind of working as the program administrator, coordinating everything, and they're funneling the materials into the Plateau Peoples portal. So they're still acting clearly as the lead, but there can be space for several smaller collaborators, and we are looking for authentic partnerships of collaboration through the program.
What percentage of those forwarded to the final round are generally funded? And of those 50 finalists last year, roughly how many received the grant? It's hard to get, do you award partial grants? If someone requests 300,000, would you award just 150,000? So it's really dependent upon how many people apply, how many make it to the final round, and how much those applications are requesting. It really, so if everybody's asking for 300,000, our funding rate will probably be low. We have $4 million to award. it's going to be contingent upon how many people apply, how many people actually ask for the 300,000, or if we have unprecedented amount of applicants asking for less than 100,000 or 100 to 200, then our funding rate will go up. We hope to try to fund as many people as possible. We'd love to give everybody a grant, but that's not always possible. We have not announced anything about the last cycle yet. So we are hesitant. We'll not be answering that question about how many people got funded in cohort 2. So we have not announced that yet. And we try not to do contingent funding. We do encourage people, though, if they want to add a cost share to their budgets, that they can then add a cost share to their budget. For example, sometimes people will ask for $200,000 and then in their budget narrative only say that we will be paying some of the salary at a cost share. So that's one way people can bring that total acts down by providing some of that themselves, but we do not require a cost share.
Thank you for inviting us to learn about this opportunity. For smaller institutions, can the grant funds be put toward contract positions for additional hands and assistance? Yes. I know some of you may be more familiar with our other program, Recordings at Risk, which requires you to use a digitization vendor. There's more flexibility in hidden collections to build your proposals to do the work as needed. There is not any kind of limitation from bringing in contract term employees to do digitization in-house if you do not have the capacity already on staff.
What kinds of things do organizations use the money for? Well, the first thing we hope they use it for is all of the processes necessary for digitization. So I think this question is more about budgetary categories. Some organizations may use the money to supplement for salary. For example, if your archivist, your collections manager are going to be using a percentage of their time to work specifically on this project, they may include a FTE of 25% of their time for this project for the next 3 years. Sometimes that also includes, and usually it includes, fringe benefits, which you can add that to it. Sometimes people use outside digitization vendors. Sometimes they use a combination of both, doing some of the digitization in-house and some of them externally. Those services would be put under services in your budget, and that's what they'd be using the money for. They use it for outreach programming. Sometimes they do it for metadata creation and salaries attached to that, transcription of the metadata, equipment and supplies. Your equipment and supplies budget can be as high as $15,000 for this cycle. Sometimes they need a new scanner. These are only supplies that are necessary for the project and not to handle your everyday expenses that your organization would already supply. So these are sometimes it's services, sometimes, as you heard earlier, for honorariums. So I would recommend that you go to our allowable and disallowed costs in the guidelines, and you'll see a breakdown of the categories and the expense types.
We are interested in obtaining a 3D scanner and scanning artifacts that are currently on exhibit in order to expand our accessibility, both remote access and for those with disabilities. Are there parts of a project like that we should leave out of the application? Staff time versus hardware costs, things like that. Not necessarily if they're all relevant to the project, and you can justify their relationship to the digitization and accessibility of the materials. No. We do have limits for some of these categories. As I think Sharon mentioned before, we have a $15,000 equipment and supplies limit. So, based on the hardware that you're looking at, that may not be enough. And you may then want to do a cost share to show that you're covering the rest of those hardware costs. So some of those limits may dictate how you want to flex your project design, but I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a better strategy to build out your budget from.
Hi, I'm from the north of Argentina. I'm working with an indigenous community. I want to know if we can apply. Unfortunately, I know this program is only open to nonprofit cultural heritage and preservation organizations located within the United States or Canada. The nominated materials must be owned and held by an organization within the United States or Canada. Any other countries outside of that, unfortunately, we're not able to fund and offer this program.
Does the applicant have to use an outside service to do the digitization, or if they have the technology, skills, and experience in-house, will the program support the applicant doing the digitization themselves? So yeah, there are plenty of large capacity institutions that have received grants through this program that do their digitization in-house, and you will primarily see that represented in their budget via staff costs rather than vendor costs. If they already have a digital archivist on staff, for instance. We don't dictate that choice for you in this program. It's based on what works best for your project, which will take in factors of the formats that you're working with and your location.
Given the new DOJ accessibility regulations, can the grant be applied to create transcripts and audio descriptions for AV material digitized under the grant? Yes, yes, it can. And specifically with this program that amplifies underheard voices, most of the communities in the marginalized communities reflected in the nominated materials typically require that anyway. There'll be language issues, language differences, and we encourage that. So yes, you can add that to your budget.
A variant of a query above. Does having received prior funding from another, in my case, European funding source, compromise eligibility? No. We really only track previous funding within our own programs. If you were working on a large scale project for which this funding would be just covering a phase of that project, it can usually make sense to explain that in the application. We do have funded projects like this where, we're funding like phase 2. Something else was funded through an IMLS grant. That's not something the review panel is unused to seeing, but it can be best to kind of explain it and make sure that you keep the budgeting completely separate.
Will we be able to make the collection public on our own platform? Yeah, so the requirement for the digitization is that the metadata is made publicly available to the public. So that would be great. Sometimes we find smaller organizations who may not have the long-term sustainability to house the public, to house the project. Sometimes partners with a larger organization that might have the infrastructure that's necessary for the gateway to be on both organizations' platform. So yes, the answer to that is yes.
Would an exhibition be considered a reasonable outreach activity, or is that outside the scope? This section was not clear to me in the provided materials. I do think an exhibition can be a reasonable outreach activity. We definitely have had, particularly on the museum side of grantees, where exhibitions have been put together for outreach. I would say one of the funding limitations, though, is we do not allow funding for kind of like general supplies. So if you were doing an exhibition, we wouldn't fund like cases for it that you would then use moving forward in your museum in perpetuity. If that's a good example, I hope.
Would a private collection independent scholar be acceptable if partnered with a library or other nonprofit organization? So the purpose of this grant is to help organizations who may be constricted, nonprofit organizations, cultural institutions, cultural heritage, historical societies, museums, libraries, and such, who may be constricted due to financial limitations, to digitize projects, not for independent scholars to have their collections digitized. Unfortunately, that is outside the wheelhouse of this project. I don't think I want to add anything to that. Do you, Alyson? Okay.
Would creation of a public-facing digital exhibit that features both newly digitized materials and previously digitized materials be an allowable cost? I believe so, if the focus is featuring the new materials. You can send an email with more specific details, but I don't think that we would have a limitation for that.
Can two groups from the same institution apply, or is it one application per institution? That's a great question. So sometimes we have large campuses. So I'm going to say like the University of California is a great example of one. And they may be the library system over here, and they also have a museum. Yes, two groups from the same institution can apply. If it's a situation within the same EIN number, and if you both make it to the final round, then we will have to ask for one of them to withdraw. But there are geographical, or there are some organizations who have a geographically have more than one more than one area. Like we've had two different libraries at the same campus apply. They kind of count as two different libraries. It depends on the EIN numbers and the geographic location. You can apply if it's the same within the same, so say it's the same library and there are two different applications, then you can apply, but we wouldn't fund both. Somebody's gonna have to withdraw. I hope that answers. Do you want to add anything to that, Alyson?
I would just, yeah, the most frequent time it comes up is when we have very large universities with either like branch campuses or different like kind of distinct schools within their school. And in that case, they have separate EIN charitable notations, and we do allow that, but we would not allow three
In the
from
same
the
public library.
same, yeah.
Yeah. If it's
We
the
will
med
let you
school,
know if we would let you know if we got too many from an institution and you had to withdraw.
and if there's a specific organization you want us to check that the two applications come for, please email us at hiddencollections@clir.org, and we'll be happy to answer that specifically for you.
Would digitizing collections from worldwide historical events qualify for this funding? Example is Tiananmen Square, student protests, Philippines, 1980s, etc. As long as they're owned and held by a eligible organization in the United States or Canada, that's fine. They do not have to be specific to events within those two countries.
For projects from educational institutions, do you encourage student, UG, grad, pre-doc involvement in the scope of work? Our independent review panel looks favorably at those. They provide training for up and coming new generations in the GLAMS professions. So I think they look great at that as long as the pay is equitable. That is a big factor for our review panels, so that the pay be equitable to the area in which you live, and that hopefully there's some guidance. So you would include that in your salaries. We do not cover tuition waivers.
Does a collection of production film material, negatives, outtakes, trims, prints, etc., for an independent documentary, the subject of which would fall into the mission of this grant, qualify as a collection? The grant would be used for digital preservation and access files for these materials. It would again be reliant on whose materials these are. If they're held by an eligible organization, from the format description, I don't see any reason why they would not be. So if you want to email us with more information about that, we can respond. But if they're held by an eligible organization, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't be a viable collection.
Our project will focus on 18th century documents, many of which are handwritten and require transcription to increase accessibility. Would we be allowed to include the transcription consultant fees in the budget? You would add those fees as a service vendor, and there's a limitation on this, and it will require a quote from that service vendor if it's over, what is the amount, 10?
5,000.
5,000, if it's over $5,000. But yes, understandably, that would be allowable.
I think this next one we already answered basically, so I'm going to skip to one after it. Does a minimum percentage of the project budget need to be dedicated solely to digitization costs? Unlike RAR, we don't have a set threshold, but we do want the focus of the program to remain on digitization, and other project materials and activities to be supplementary or secondary to digitization as the main goal of the project. It's harder with this one to kind of do a 50-50 split, which is what we advise in our other program. We would like to see at least half the funds, because with in-house digitization and processing, it can be difficult to see exactly where the line is sometimes. But we do want the bulk of this awarded funds to be used to digitize files.
What is an authentic partnership? So based on our website, authentic partnerships include meaningful engagements with the communities and organizations who the nominated materials or the source materials will tell. And they want you to build inclusive teams across organizational and geographic boundaries. So each partner and project's needs and goals should be acknowledged in the project planning stages, working to design the project together. Throughout the process, each partner should be clear on the goals and deliverables and have a voice in any decisions about fulfilling them. So what do we mean by this? I'll give an example of like an indigenous collection. In an indigenous collection, what we want to see is that you've reached out and already built have and continue to build a relationship with the tribal organization whose collections that you are digitizing in this. What does it look like? It's getting their permission. It's bringing them to the table to have input on the collections and how you're going to preserve it, how it's going to be made available, what their limitations may be. This shows up in honorariums for that. It shows up in if you're bringing in a group of scholars or you're going to visit, you're paying for the travel for those community scholars whose collections you're talking about and you're digitizing in the project. It includes symposiums. How are you giving back? Are you just, what they don't want to see is that you're just digitizing this for the benefit of you and not the community around you, and how you're bringing them to the table to have these conversations and empowering them in the process.
We have time for a couple more. Can a nonprofit organization be the applicant, partnering with historic church congregations to digitize their collections? Is there any restriction on faith-based organizations being direct or indirect recipients? The primary applicant would be the nonprofit that would likely be organizing and executing the digitization. So in this instance, we would want those partner congregations to be represented in the proposal as collaborating organizations. The majority of congregations in the United States are 501(c) nonprofit eligible, and we do not have any kind of restrictions barring faith-based nonprofits from participating. And we have done numerous grants through both this program and Recordings at Risk to different faith organizations.
Can we select specific items to be digitized rather than entire collections, and especially important representative samples? Yeah, I mean, you don't have to do an entire collection. I think what people do, the review panel wants it to make sense. Sometimes trying to do the entire collection can't be done in 1 to 3 years. Or the amount of funding. It depends on how large the nominated materials are going to be. That's up to you to pick what's most important from the collection of the nominated materials that you're going to collect. Sometimes people will apply twice. They'll do a part 1 and a part 2 of one collection because it's so massive. It's a very individual choice based on the type of materials that you have. The staffing that you have, what you're able to do, the equipment. So those are very personalized questions. I suggest that what I'm going to recommend is that the reviewers wanted to make sense fiscally and resource-wise, resources including your staffing.
I think I'll take one more, Sharon, and then we'll bump to the thank you slide. So are letters of support from collaborating institutions required to be included in the initial applications or only the final ones? So there are no letters required in the initial application. You won't need external letters of support or an internal letter of commitment until you get to the final application round. The only upload required in the initial application is an estimated budget narrative.
We'll go to the thank you slide. Any questions that we didn't get today live, we will answer for the question and answer doc that will be available on our website by next week. This time next week, give us 7 days tops to finish that. And you will see that on our website along with the recording and the transcript and the Q&A doc, which will be available as a PDF.
And we also will have a second webinar on October 2nd at 1 p.m. You can visit the Apply for an Award page to register for that webinar. That is a Q&A webinar, so we take a very brief 10 minutes at the front for a little presentation overview, and then it's just us taking your questions. So if you get into the application and you find you have some follow-up questions, come back to see us October 2nd.
Thank you.